So, have you ever heard of the paradox of the Ship of Theseus? I'm sure you have. Almost every culture has a variant of the story. Plutarch first recorded this legend in the 1st century. The whole idea is that Theseus returns to Athens on board his ship. And upon return, upon harboring the ship, the Athenians wanted to preserve that ship, to always remember Theseus and his adventures and what he did for Athens. So the ship actually ends up in a museum of sorts. And over centuries, every time a plank of wood rotted, it was replaced with a new piece of timber. To the point where almost every single piece of wood had rotted and was replaced with new timber. So throughout the centuries, you had philosophers like Plato debate this idea of identity. If every single piece of wood has been replaced with new wood, is it still the same ship? Where it gets even crazier is that centuries later, Thomas Hobbes, yet another philosopher, adds another wrench to this whole philosophical debate. And he says, what if all that discarded rotted wood was gathered up and a second ship was made with that rotted wood? You'd have two ships now. Which one is the Ship of Theseus? So this paradox, this idea of dual identity, this has been around for a long time. It's been debated. Is the updated ship the real ship? Is the new ship created out of the discarded wooden planks the real ship? Who knows? This was even explored in the most recent television series, WandaVision. If you're a fan of Marvel, maybe you've seen it. We end up with two heroes, Vision. One with the memories and a new body, and the other with the reassembled old body without memories. Vision actually talks to the new White Vision and tells him this Theseus paradox. And the White Vision responds with, well, neither of them is the ship. Both of them are the ship. Again, a paradox. So how do we really reconcile this idea when we're working on vintage amps? I don't think most folks who work on vintage amps think about the paradox of the Ship of Theseus. I think they just do their job, replace caps, replace resistors to achieve an optimal version of what that amp should be. Now, I don't know what the answer is to the paradox. All I know is that when I'm working on this 1965 amp, I want to try to maintain its original form and its original cause as much as I possibly can. But I know that's almost virtually impossible. Let's go ahead and get to it. Let's see what we have. Let's take a look at the amp. Let's update what we have to. Let's try to maintain its original identity. But if we have to replace parts. No getting around it. All right, so we're going to be restoring this Silvertone amp. This was part of the 1457 amp in case, and so I removed this and the speaker from the case to restore the case, and now we're working on the amp. And this is it, and it's pretty much all original with the exception of this rectifier tube. So these are all Silvertone original tubes, right? The 12AX7, 6V6, and the other 12AX7 that runs the Trem. The only thing that's not original is this. This is a GE rectifier, and then this is one that came loose. I'm not really sure. It doesn't have a brand, just says USA 6X4. The date on the pots is 1965, so this one was the 40th week of 65. This is the 39th week of 1965, so it's 1965. And then this is the death cap right here. So because this particular fuse holder didn't come with a fuse holder cap, I need to replace the whole thing. Since we're going to be doing this modification anyway to a 3-prong, let's go ahead and first start unsoldering the fuse and the switch and the mains. Get this main out of here, this 2-prong. The strain relief is going to probably crack when we pop it out, so I got a new strain relief for the 3-prong. We'll wire this up correctly, get rid of the death cap, and once this power is wired up correctly, I'll feel better about plugging it in. I might go ahead and service the pots also, clean those. Let's go ahead and remove the 2-prong. The death cap removed. Let's just toss this and never think about it again. Okay, so when I first took this out of the box, this rectifier tube wasn't even in the socket, and there was a second rectifier tube that it came with. Now, I suspect that the previous owners couldn't get this to turn on. They probably thought the rectifier tube was bad, so they bought that second one, but it's not the rectifier tube. It's the socket. And this whole tube up here, look how it wiggles around, is just sitting there loose. Loose as a goose. So the problem here is this whole socket needs to be replaced. These sockets are riveted in there. And that's the case usually with a lot of these vintage amps. So we're going to have to drill these rivets out and then replace the socket and mount the new socket with some bolts. We want to do the easiest things first. So this will be the last thing we do. Okay, so the tremolo circuit's not working, right? And a lot of the times on these old amps, that's one of the first things to go, the tremolo circuit. Typically, a lot of people think it's the tube, and it usually is not the tube. In most cases, it's the oscillating caps here. So there is a 0.01, 0.01, these are identical, and a 0.02 here. These are probably the first things people replace. I'm not going to replace those. I think it's this leaky cap here. I think this is the culprit right there. So a lot of people, when they're replacing these old caps, will actually hollow them out and then put the new cap in them with the new cap's leads coming out. That way it still looks like a vintage cap and it retains some of that vintage mojo. That's not to trick anybody. It's not to fool anybody. You can obviously tell that it's been kind of recapped, but it just overall keeps the aesthetic of the actual internals looking the same. So since this is my amp, I'm okay with just replacing this with a brand new cap, even though it won't fit in or look proper. Most people might want it to fit in and they'll want you to stuff a brand new cap in there. Either way, I'm keeping this guy. He's gonna go into my stash. So check out these tasty goodies. This is from Tone. All these caps that I got. Let's take a look. These are the cheapest caps you can get from Tone. They're like the Dijon series. But just imagine all these matching caps in the amp. It looks so cool. Of course, I bought them. I may not need them. If I don't have to replace them, I won't. We got the oscillating caps, cathode caps, and of course this guy here, which is going to replace that leaked 0.5 200 volts. So I was able to find a 0.47 microfarad at 630 volts. So the voltage doesn't matter. And this is going to be close enough. But notice that this guy is way too big to stuff inside the old cap. He's much bigger, but he's real pretty. He's going to last another 50 years in there. So just for comparison, you can see that this guy is just a little bit shorter, but way, way fatter. He'll go right there. I'll keep this guy and store him in my stash. The first thing we're going to do is clip these leads. These things are so cool. Alright, so the solder's done. I added this heat shrink insulation on the leads. So Doesn't come into contact with anything else. So let's test it. Okay, so that's what I figured. It's never going to be, well, I don't want to say never, but it's very unlikely that it's the tube of the Trem that isn't working. It's usually going to be the oscillating caps, but because this guy had that, oh, this guy here, this guy was really leaky, I suspected it might be that. So replacing that 0.5 200 volts with this 0.47 600 and what, 630 volts, that did the job. All right, so now we're going to check all the resistors on the multimeter to ensure they're all within spec. I won't do all of these. This is totally boring. I know it is. So the first one we're going to do is this one coming off pin 8 of the 12AX7, which is R7, and this should read 2.2K. So I'll just show you what that looks like. You can take a look on the multimeter. And this is reading 2.4K. So I'm going to just say that R7, which should be 2.2, is actually 2.49. All right, let's do one more. I'm going to go through these all on my own. So the next resistor we're going to check is coming off pin 6 off the preamp 12AX7. This is R8, and he should read 100K. So let's see if he's reading 100K. Come on, little dude. 101.5. All right, so R8 should be 100K, and we're measuring 101.5. I think all the resistors are going to be essentially within spec. I don't think we're going to have too much of an issue with any of them. So I replaced the socket for the rectifier tube, the 6X4. It was really loose. The tube itself was just not stable in the socket. And this was a success, but the amp itself after that replacement is still crackly, right? Anytime you touch it or tap it, crackles. And that's basically going to be two things. One, a bad solder joint on some of these sockets, right? And so I went through every single one of these point-to-points and I resoldered everything. So I just heated up the solder and put new ones on all these points. So this is all brand new solder. And it was still crackling every time you touched it, right? And the problem has to do with the socket of the preamp tube. So we have this bad pin not making a connection. And so I took the tube out and I looked inside the socket, and sure enough, that socket in there was loose completely and broken. So let me see if I can get a shot of that. So this little guy in here was super loose, wasn't making a connection, and was completely broken. I don't know how or why, but it just was completely wrecked. And there was really no way to repair something like that. So this whole socket has to go. So once again, for this preamp 12AX7, I'm gonna have to drill out the rivets and replace this and resolder all the points. So let's get a proper sound demo of this amp after the restoration. I have the amp mic'd up right now with a SM57 running through a Mogami cable into the Focusrite Solo. I'll be using this P90 equipped Strat that I built, and we're gonna just go ahead and get some tones out of here. Thanks for watching this restoration, and take it easy.